Live from the podcast studio, this is From Long Distance Marriage with Rich and Andrea. We're a once long-distance couple who closed 5,000 miles of distance and are now happily married.
We talk long distance, marriage and relationships.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 49 of From Long Distance Marriage. This week we have a special guest for you. We're joined by Dr. Laura Lewis, who's a psychologist specializing in relationship therapy. We talk about communication, mental health, and arguing in relationships, so we think you'll get a lot out of this. Enjoy the episode. So hello, Laura, how are you?
I am well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for approaching us. We're really interested to hear a little bit more about what you can help us and our listeners with. So would you mind just telling us a bit about yourself, your qualifications, and why you reached out to From Long Distance to Marriage?
Absolutely. So I am a psychologist. I'm also the author of the book Marital Peace, where I help couples to overcome challenges in their relationships, like communication challenges, conflict resolution, intimacy, and rebuilding trust. Those are some of the main areas that I work in. I'm also a professional speaker. I speak all around the country and internationally on very similar topics. And so I wanted to reach out just to be able to provide a support to your listeners about one of the number one areas that I see that couples struggle with, which is communication. So I'm excited to talk to you today.
Yes, that's true. I mean, communication is something that we talk a lot about, no pun intended. But yeah, it's something I think that it's a common theme that comes up in just about every single episode and every topic we cover. So that's something that's really important to us.
Well, I mean, just on that, because the observation we've got, and I'd just be curious to hear yours, is we kind of feel the reason we talk about it so much is we kind of think it's ironic that so many couples we're aware of don't really communicate in all sorts of areas, including their needs, or maybe they over communicate their own needs but aren't receptive to their partner's needs, for instance, or just whatever, but generally sort of a lack of communication. Is that something that you feel the same way about?
Yes. Oh my goodness. I think you touched on something that is such a good point, that sometimes it's not that couples are not talking, but it's that they are really clear about what their needs are. And that's the only thing that they're talking about. And so instead of like listening and taking in, okay, this is what I could do better, or this is how I got it wrong, or this is how I can change. Like instead of listening to get to that, is more listening to like form a rebuttal. Right.
And that so that's a really interesting. I was reading something about this earlier this evening, so it's interesting timing for you to mention that about people forming a rebuttal. And then so, because to me, then it's not so much a communication as the time when their partner's talking to them is just they're using that almost what they perceive as silence in their head to form, as you said, their rebuttal, when they're going into it more combative than civil.
Exactly. A lot of times I I work a lot with angry, distant couples. And so a lot of times when couples come to see me, to come to see a psychologist, it's mainly because like there's been some resentment or something that they're upset about. And so they're ready to fight. A lot of times when couples come into my office, like they have a whole list of things that their partner could do differently.
So I want to ask your opinion on something. So you said they're ready to fight. Do you feel like, and I don't want to put words in your mouth at all, so I could be completely off base. This is tied into what I was reading earlier. But do you feel that any of these couples almost want the fight, and not that they want the bad relationship, but there's some sort of feel-good factor to the argument, or one-upmanship winning the argument?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's a feeling of like, I don't want to be in pain anymore. Like, I'm so tired of feeling like I'm on the losing side of this and I'm not getting what I want. I'm not getting my needs met. And so I don't know if it's necessarily that they want to fight, but they want to get on some side of relief. And so it just ends up being that the fighting comes out, but it's really oftentimes from a place of pain.
Right, so it's not coming from it's negative place in so much as pain is negative, but it's not coming from a place of malicious intent to hurt them.
Yes, that's it. You hit the head right on the nail. Like, that is exactly it.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think looking a little bit, at your website and what you talk about, and there were some kind of topics that we discussed previously. So I guess this is going to tie into communication a lot, but what are some of the key areas that you think couples struggle with the most?
One of the main areas is how to resolve conflict. That's the number one reason why couples that are married end up divorcing, is because of communication, feeling like you're not hearing me, you don't understand me. And as a result, a lot of times there's a disconnection that happens.
Okay.
So on that, something I'm curious about, and I think because our listeners are all different stages of the relationship. Some of them are married and long distance. Some of them are at the very early stage relationship and long distance, and then obviously right through to people who are long term, live together, married in the quote unquote more normal situation of living together and everything. So, your experience, is there any difference in any of what we're talking about, depending on the length of time people have been together? Are they more likely to be, I'm assuming that there's more conflict the longer they've been together once that honeymoon period's worn off. But then as far as conflict resolution, the ability to communicate more effectively, is that something that couples should be on the lookout for the more time they're together, or is it something that you can see happening pretty early on as well?
Usually it's about 3 years into the relationship. So whether it's marriage or they're in a committed relationship, usually about 3 years in, that's when things start to stabilize and they no longer have that like fanciful glow of like, you just complete me and we're just like running on this cloud. Like, usually it's about 3 years in where the couple starts to see their partner's flaws more clearly.
And then, so what about, because 3 years, I suppose, is enough time for a lot of couples to be pretty far in. That's enough time, I think, for some living together. There may be children, there may home ownership, like kind of at the point where it's hard to walk away without there being, you in some way or another, there's a lot more commitment to that person, and it may mean, in the case of children, it may mean that they're going to be in your life forever. Is that
Absolutely.
How does that play into this sort of 3 year thing that you're talking about, and the conflict?
Well, that's a good question, because when couples come in to see me for couples therapy, one of the questions that I ask them is, do they have children? What was the transition like for them into parenthood? And for some couples, that's when they first started to feel dissatisfaction, because they're not sleeping together as much. They don't, a lot of times, for women, their bodies will change in terms of like their libido, how often they want to have sex. And so the transition to parenthood can really be difficult for most couples based on the research. And so that's when we also see a huge decline in satisfaction.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's a huge change in your life. And so it's difficult for us to comment on this. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners, are in a situation where they have children, and in one way or another, their children are affecting their relationship. And that's not something we talk about because, we don't.
Do you mean negatively affecting it, or just there's some impact from kids?
I think maybe not necessarily negative, but just difficult.
Right.
And that's not something that we can talk about because, we don't have children. But I think, do you see a lot with the people that you help that if are fighting and arguing and lack of communication does sometimes come as a result of having children?
Yes, I do. I see that that comes up a lot, and mainly it's because you're tired, you're not getting enough hours of sleep. you have different expectations when you have kids. So maybe like before kids, you can come and go as you want. You can like on a whim, let's go on vacation. Let's go, like, let's just take a quick trip. But then now that you have children, your financial resources are not what they used to be. And so because you're having to spend more on like maintaining the family, and then also you can't be as spontaneous as you could have been before. And so that takes the couple some time to get adjusted to their new life.
Yeah.
And what sort of conversations do you encourage, people in those sort of situations to have to kind of maybe try and find, some common ground again, or a sense of normality through that?
For women, I encourage them to have conversations about what they need. A lot of times, my female clients will say to me, like, he just doesn't get it. Like, I have to do everything. I have to wash the clothes, go to work. I have to do all these different things. So a lot of times for my women clients, being crystal clear about the areas in which you need support. So for example, that might look like, hey, if you could get the kids ready in the morning, that would help me out a lot, because then I would be able to, I don't know, take a shower that day. Like, a lot of my new moms are like, I just don't even have time to take a bath. And so whatever it is, just being specifically clear about what you need. Maybe what you need is to be able to take a walk or go see your friends, but having some clear, specific ask. And then a lot of times for my male clients, that are transitioning into parenthood, they say, well, we just don't have sex anymore. I don't feel like she desires me. I don't feel like she really wants me. And so having like some conversations about sex can be really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to ask a question. This might be, I don't know if controversial is the right word. It's something though. Back on the topic of, women needing to really speak up and almost give crystal clear step-by-step instructions for what, they need from their husband, especially, when kids are in the mix. I know I'm not the only one, because, I've talked to a lot of friends about this over the years, and not just in my relationship with Rich and in previous relationships. There's something about women where we really wish that they just knew. That we didn't have to. It's like, but you should just know. And whether or not that's realistic or not, because I know in certain cases it's absolutely unrealistic. Do you, like, psychologically, is there anything behind that? Like, why is that something that we almost expect, and yet that men just, I know sometimes they can anticipate needs really well, but in those times of maybe stress or difficulty, they just can't seem to just read it. Is there anything psychological behind that for why we're like that?
Is there anything psychological to why we want the person to just know? I'm not sure, but I definitely know that comes up so much. And so for some women that tell me, like, I want him to just know, like, if I have to ask him, then it doesn't even count. Like, it doesn't even matter to me as much if I have to ask for it. And so then they end up doing it all and then feeling frustrated. Like, I gotta fold the clothes and cook.
What's your professional advice to that? Is that a case of them being unreasonable or needing their expectations like reframed, or like how do you respond to that?
I think both sexes have to bend a little bit. Like, both sexes have to like come towards each other a little bit more, instead of the expectation being that you're going to completely come towards me, or I'm going to completely come towards you. Both genders being willing to say, hey, maybe I can be a little bit more intentional about washing the clothes, or for the other person, hey, maybe I could ask you more for what I want. And maybe the clothes aren't going to be washed exactly the way I would have, but hey, I'm willing to, like, let it go because it's something that matters to me. So if you don't fold it just right, I'm just going to let that part go.
That's interesting, because I don't know if you've heard it, but we did one of our recent episodes was an interview with with David Feldman, who's a couples therapist.
Yeah.
And one of the things we spoke about was sort of picking your battles. And he said he has this. I can't remember the exact
kind of a
phrasing,
rule
but
for himself.
yeah, he has a rule of what is so important to him that he can't let it go, and then everything else he's prepared to let go. So the example we were talking about was a hypothetical example of me leaving my clothes on the floor and Andrew being annoyed about it and how she should respond. And the conversation we had was, for him, that's not big enough for him to start a fight about, and it's something he's sort of physically capable of picking those clothes up in 10 seconds and it keeps the peace. But there are some things that are more of his red lines, and knowing sort of what hill you're prepared to die on, so to speak.
But he also had a great thing of, if there's something that's, a niggle or something, a pet peeve that his partner does, if it's something that he knows he can take care of himself, he does it. And I think, what Laura's been saying a lot is compromise. And that's something we always hear. Our parents told us, kind of growing up, it's so important in a marriage or relationship, compromise. But it's so hard. And I think so many people don't actually understand the definition of the word compromise. And this is something that we've had to work through. And I think people almost assume, well, sometimes you compromise and don't get what you want, and sometimes I compromise and I don't get what I want, kind of vice versa. But I think to really make it work, it's both of you giving a little bit and meeting in the middle. So neither of you get exactly what you want, but it's something that you can deal with so that nobody's getting, I guess, that constant, for lack of a better word, win. So for sometimes you'll completely be on the same page, of course, but on those things that you can't meet on, you are both going to have to sacrifice and give to meet in the middle. That's two lives coming together. You have to give. You have to back down sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. Like, sometimes we have to be willing to say, you know what, I'm going to come more towards my mate on this one.
Yeah. And probably in that instance, both of you are going to have to come towards each other a little bit more, I think.
So, in keeping with this theme, I suppose the next question is, what's the best way for couples to keep the peace in their relationship? And I think, just to elaborate on that question, I kind of see there are the couples who are really deep in the trenches, and there's a lot more of that sort of acrimonious environment where the arguments, disagreements probably happen pretty frequently. And then you've got the couples who it may be just good advice for them to hear early on and to know this advice before they get too deep into relationships. So what's your advice there?
So for couples who they need to figure out a way to resolve conflict, part of it is taking ownership, taking responsibility, acknowledgement, and change. Like, it stops criticism. So if anybody's feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm just tired of my mate always criticizing me, I'm tired of my spouse always having something critical to say, really taking a look inward and saying, okay, well, what is it that I contribute to this? And being willing to verbally acknowledge, hey, I could have said that wrong. Hey, that did come out the wrong way. And I know it's because I had a long day and it was stressful. But I really want to acknowledge that I said that the wrong way. And I apologize. So acknowledgement and change.
I think that's so important.
Well, that's really in keeping with what we talk a lot about too. We always say to have the self-awareness to say, what could I have done better? Did I say or do something that, when you're together a long time, pretty well what sets your partner off, what their trigger points are, how to avoid them, how to deliberately not avoid them. And just, we talk quite a lot about knowing the role you play in, one, keeping the peace, and two, causing an argument. So I think that sits nicely with that.
Yeah, I think in the heat of it, like I guess keeping the peace is always the goal, but sometimes you just, in the heat of the moment, things do get a bit escalated and argumentative. But I think how can you encourage someone to do that, to take that ownership for actually, you know what, I said that in a really crappy way when you are in the middle of that argument? Because if we could do that, if we could acknowledge,
like, you don't want to lose face.
Yeah, and I think, I'm going to be quite honest here, and if you want to edit out, you can. But this is something that I think Rich really struggles with, in the sense that you like I'm happy to argue it out to the bitter end and get it out and admit my faults, whereas you kind of shut down a little bit more, and like you'll say something that I find quite hurtful, and I'll tell you that, and in the moment you like, just because you're so wrapped up in what's going on, it's like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but then my attitude to it is, I think, let's not have the argument, and I shut down, and then I prefer to sort of come back to it when cooler heads prevail.
Yeah, I get you.
It's not like sweep it under the carpet and
no, I'm saying in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
Like, later on, you can always admit it. But I think if people could just do that in the moment, and we all struggle. I'm not by any means saying that I'm an angel and he's just the one fighting with me. That's absolutely not the case. Then fights wouldn't get so escalated. Things wouldn't get so far if you could actually hold on. I shouldn't have said that. It would shut things down so much better if people could just, in the moment, kind of take responsibility.
I agree. So one of the things that I think that couples have to understand is that men and women experience communication and conflict differently. Like, women tend to like have this wanting to talk it through, wanting to like have just a higher tolerance for conflict, whereas men tend to stonewall a lot more. So stonewalling is basically where one person shuts down, and sometimes the shutdown is a physical shutdown, like, I'm walking away, I'm done with this conversation, I don't want to keep talking about this. Or sometimes the shutdown is staying physically present but mentally like not being there.
Like, checking out.
Yeah, checking out. I'm fine. One word answers. That's when the shutdown is.
Yeah, that's very me.
Yeah.
That's I stonewall for sure. And I think it's not. Obviously, this is probably different for everyone, but for me, it's not meant as like disrespect. Like, this isn't worth my time. It's just one, as a personal flaw, I guess. I'm not in the state of mind to resolve it at that point. But then there's also part of me that just knows from experience, I guess, that we can keep going down this conversation in this moment. It is not going to have a happy ending. We just know that it's not going to be resolved because we each just dig our heels in.
Would be if you disagree with me. It'd be absolutely fine.
But so the experience there is, okay, this is the point at which one of us needs to walk away or whatever, and we'll reconvene. And we never leave it to fester for long. We'll talk it out that day and whatever, but we'll come back to it when we're cooler and calmer, and we can both say, look, this is what I did wrong, this is why I said it, or why I said it the way I said it, and the apologies will happen and things. And that's when we have the resolution. And it's always that it's unpleasant and uncomfortable in the moment when the stonewalling happens, but that's certainly why it happens for us.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So when the peace kind of, there's always going to be instances where it can't be kept, and it's something that we're really, as couples, we're passionate enough about, or it matters enough about to fight about. What's the best way to end a fight, and how's kind of the best way to resolve that?
Well, if you are at a point where physically, like, you're starting to get upset, like you can feel it in your body. For some people, that is their heart starts to race, and that lets you know, okay, when my heart starts to race, like, okay, I'm starting to get elevated. If you are at that point where you're experiencing racing thoughts, you're sweating, your heart is racing, then you may have gotten to a point where you are feeling flooded. And when you are flooded, it is important that you take a break from the communication, because that's when it's at a point where it's hard to think rationally. It's hard to problem solve at that point. And so what I would say for couples who are in that place, it is important to just say, like, hey, could we take a break? Could we maybe talk about this in an hour? Can we revisit this in a few hours? And then when you take a break, do something that is physically soothing. So something that may be soothing is taking a hot bath, going for a run, going to play basketball, listening to some soft music, meditation. And so just practicing some of your coping skills and then coming back together when both of you are calm. Now, I recommend that whoever was the person that was flooded, that to be the person who initiates the coming back together.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what if you've got someone, let's say you're feeling flooded and you say, let's come back to this in an hour or two. What happens if your partner says, no, we've got to do this now. I'm not prepared to have these thoughts in my head while you go off and play basketball or whatever. I'm assuming that happens sometimes. So just if someone listening is in that kind of situation, how would you deal with that?
So that does happen sometimes where one person wants or needs to take a break and then the other person is not willing to. And that's one of the benefits of couples therapy is because you have someone that's helping you facilitate effective communication, because we do need education on communication. Like, all of these things are not intuitive. We need training on how to effectively communicate. And so one of the things that I talk about in my After I Do Academy, my membership program for couples, is I explain that you have to understand, if we continue this conversation, it's not going to be good, right? And that's the goal of communication. The goal of communication is I send a message, you receive the message. But if I'm too elevated to receive the message that you're sending, then it's not going to be effective. And so that's when I get into some other strategies, like having a gentle startup, taking responsibility, describing your feelings and your needs.
So did you said you've got a mentorship program for couples?
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about that? And is it for any couple, or is it for couples who are experiencing difficulty? Do they have to be married? Can you just give a bit more information about that?
Great question. So the After I Do Academy, it's where you get expert training. Every single month, I have an expert training on communication, intimacy, rebuilding trust. Right now, it's a $1 trial or €1 trial where you just have access to it for the whole month for €1. And then after that, then it's $20 a month. So what the expert training is that you're getting support on how to actually communicate effectively. You're also getting a Q&A session with me, because I know that sometimes couples are having conflict and they're like, I need somebody else to help my boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other understand things better for me, because I can't explain it right. I can't explain it well. And so that's where you have the Q&A session with me.
Does this also is it also relevant for people who are earlier on, like maybe they're engaged, they want to have like pre-marriage therapy or
prep?
Yeah, prep. But I don't want to say therapy, because maybe it's not about overcoming existing problems, but maybe they want help with knowing
proactive.
Yeah, proactive. Yeah. So when these inevitabilities happen, they're able to say, okay, I know how to deal with this. Can you help with that?
Yes, Rich, that is such a great question, because a lot of times couples don't do the premarital work. A lot of times couples will just kind of prepare for the wedding, but not really prepare for, what's going to happen after we get married.
Right, yeah.
And so
it's just a party.
The marriage.
Yeah. And so that's the benefit of this program, is that you'll get the opportunity to get support on all of the main areas that is covered in premarital counseling. So communication, intimacy, finances, those are some of the main areas that couples don't talk about before marriage.
Right, finances.
Yeah.
So is this where do people find this?
So I can send the link so that we can post it in
we'll include it in the show notes, for sure.
Okay. All right.
I have Oh yeah. So what's in the sorry, I'm really intrigued about this. So for members, is it they get the expert advice? Do they also get access to other members, like a community, or is it would that be potentially conflicting with hearing other people's problems? Is it just you they get to talk to?
No, they get to talk to other people as well. So the Q&A session will be with other couples as well, because that's one of the things that I noticed is that sometimes couples need support of other couples, because it's something about hearing that, okay, I'm not just struggling with this issue by myself, but other people are experiencing similar challenges and this is how they're getting through it. And so that's the benefit of the monthly Q&A session.
That's really interesting, because that's something, we mentioned our interview with David, and he said, like, it's really great if couples have kind of an external, almost mentor couple that has kind of been there, done that, got through it, someone who's, not going to be biased and can give you kind of third party advice. So I think the community aspect of that sounds really good as well, which is really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So
that's a good point, because I loved your podcast interview that was about like not getting your family and friends involved in the deeper issues that are happening in your marriage and your relationship. And
yeah.
So having some objective third party, other people that are not necessarily your family members that can help support you and be a mentor to you can make a huge difference.
Yeah, you just reminded me. So that's when you got in touch, was after the episode. So I meant to ask you, so thanks for reminding me, is that something you see a lot of too, with sort of family and friend interference?
Absolutely, yes. And it makes it really challenging, because once you have told that family member about like the deeper issues of what your mate did or what your like significant other has said, they're not going to forget it. Like, they're not going to just forget the things that you told them in a heated moment of an argument. And maybe you as the couple, you've gotten through it, you've worked it out, but your mother, your father, your siblings, they're going to remember it. And so just being clear about not getting them in as deeply involved in the deeper issues, I think that you're spot on.
Yeah, I think the other thing we noticed with it is, or we feel about it is, if your family and friends do have an opinion, the extra difficulty with it is you're not just hearing the opinion, it's coming from people who have probably been a source of authority for you your whole life. Certainly your parents. These are people that educated you and shaped your way of life, and now they're saying to you, these are the doubts you should have. I imagine it's really hard not to have those doubts, or that not to colour your opinion. And like you said, there's not really the objectivity there from the parents, from your friends or siblings, and they're not going to forgive it and forget it.
And I think it's so easy for people to get a clouded opinion of your partner, because, of course they're only going to hear your side of it, and they're only going to hear, probably your grievances. Like, this is something we've talked about a lot. And while, I think women like to kind of just gripe a little bit more to their friends than men do. And that's something
Absolutely.
that men need to just kind of understand. And it's not from a place of hate. It's just, that's how we work through our shit. We have to talk to other women about it.
Right.
That's how we do. And it just made me realize the other day how easy it is for people to get, bad judgment. Because, if it's a friend or it's your family member, their loyalty is to you. So almost blindly, they're going to take your side. Even if you're admitting your own fault and what you played in it, then they're like, well, what about him?
Yeah, they'll almost absolve you of any responsibility.
Exactly. And like, I have a really good friend who I worked with, and I was just something trivial, like not even a big deal. Oh, Rich did this, or he always does this, or he says that. And she's like, it's so funny. And bear in mind, I praise Rich a lot, to my friends and family, because I know how important it is that they know that, yeah, sure, once in a while I'm going to complain about something, but I've made a great decision in being with this person. And she said, she's like, oh God, like, she's like, I know I'm only hearing your gripes and your side of it. She's like, but God, it's so funny the way I think, God, he just sounds like an asshole sometimes. Like, But she said it in such a jokey way, acknowledging.
Yeah.
It's a good point.
That's the thing, yeah.
You don't often go to your friends, maybe your family, but you don't often go to your friends and say gushy things. And you may say, he surprised me by cooking dinner last night, or he's sending flowers. Maybe the occasional thing, but I think you're more likely to bring up the negative and have a vent, because you don't think about the. And I think also, and this may be a British thing, I don't know, but I think you could be quite conscious that if you start talking a lot about the positives, it can seem as you being arrogant or bragging about your situation, and you can be maybe really conscious of that if you're with people who are single and don't want to be, or they're not quite as happy with their partners, and you think, oh, it's kind of like walking into a room and saying, look how much money I've got.
Well, but I think you really pinpointed something there about the British thing, and that's it's a very self-deprecating and other people deprecating culture.
We're just assholes. Really.
You're right. Whereas Americans, I think, are a little bit more. I think we're much more willing and open to praise and things like that.
Yeah.
In general, but cultural things. I think these little subtle differences. That we had to adjust to as a couple. And I mean, our cultures, of course, they're different. But I mean, compared to some cultures, there's no big difference. Really.
But just going back to that point, though, that the bragging and the arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd love to see people being more open about the positives of the relationship, because one of the other things we talk about quite a lot is more pertaining to marriage than just relationships, but this modern day view that it's something to be mocked, and of course you're almost not going to like your partner. They're just going to be a constant source of irritation for you, and then this becomes like the normal perception. And like you said, you go to your friends and you just bitch about your partner. And I feel like if we spoke more positively about how we feel about them and the good things they do for us, I really think you could kind of shift that conversation to paying more attention to the positives and how they enhance your lives, and not just all the little things that you don't like. But
I agree.
People are inclined to do it.
Yeah, totally. And I
definitely think we need more space of talking about the good things that we enjoy, that we like, that we appreciate about one another. There's also a part of us as women where we do just kind of want to vent about what's happening. And that's part of how we as women build closeness and just having a space to unload.
Absolutely. And it can cause problems, I think, if you do it with the wrong person.
Yeah, but I think venting's great, and I think if you've got the outlet, for me, I just think it'd be nice if there was a little bit more, not even like 50-50 balance, but just a little bit more tipping the scales, so there's some room for people to say, oh, but you know what, they did this for me, and they always leave little notes for me, or just, whatever it might be, just the positives. And because then also I think people might start to expect more realistic expectations, but maybe they may feel like they're not having to settle, or I'm never going to find someone good, there's no good people out there, because everyone's complaining. If people could actually say there's good things too. So kind of going back to the conflict, moving away from the lovely stuff, obviously there's couples who are going to have the same conflict over and over again, and I don't really think, I can't think we've had this, but I know we certainly,
apart from trivial things.
Yeah, but yeah. I know that we've certainly heard from and observed people who, and so I guess sometimes it's just one partner doesn't want to hear it, but I'm sure there are other times when there is the conversation, but they can't, going back to compromise earlier, they can't reach that compromise, they can't find a point of mutual happiness, and for some reason this conflict is just kind of there rearing its head. How do you suggest couples deal with that?
There are a couple ways. One is acceptance that like there are those gridlock issues that the person may never change. Like that may be just who your significant other is, and there are certain gridlock problems that couples have. Like for some couples, a gridlock issue is I'm an earlier riser and my maid tends to stay up late. Another gridlock issue could be around like messiness or cleanliness. Another gridlock issue could be around money or being on time. Like some people are more free flowing, spontaneous, and some people are more like, no, we need to start at this exact time. We need to arrive at this time.
Yeah, definitely.
So do you mean it's more like if you accept that it's there, you're more likely to try and find solutions rather than just stop it?
So acceptance, like for example, I've been with my husband for 17 years, and he has always been really late. And so at first I was just like, why can't we be on time? Let's leave early. And so I just got to a point where I was like, okay, if it's something that is really important, then I will just scale the time up by an hour. So if I know that it starts at 3:00, then I'll just scale the time up to 2, and then we'll get there around some
Right.
point. And then other times when it's not something that matters as much, like it's not something that I absolutely it's going to be some immediate consequence, and I'm going with him, then I'll be more willing to be more in his flow. And so that's what I mean when I say acceptance that there are going to be certain areas that I can't change in my significant other.
Yeah, I like that, because I think, I think knowing that and hearing that helps people understand that it's not the fairy tale where you meet your soulmate and that means everything falls into place and you connect absolutely perfectly. There are going to be these fringe elements that you just have to, compromise on, find solutions to, accept it, just whatever it may be. But there are going to be those things, especially as time goes on. And I think it's just good for people to hear that, so they don't think, oh great, this relationship is wrong too, I guess I better move on, and actually just acknowledge that it's just part of it.
Yeah, but I actually have a question on that, which I think I totally on board with, accepting and kind of scaling behaviors and plans around things like that. But and this is kind of a question for you, Laura, before you kind of got to the point where you thought, using the example of, your husband always being late for things, did you at any point kind of feel like it also reflected badly on you that you guys were always late as a couple? Did it make you uncomfortable or embarrassed?
Yes, absolutely. I had this full-blown narrative in my mind about what his lateness meant. And one narrative was, I don't matter. It doesn't matter. What we're doing doesn't matter. Like, I'm not a priority. Like, I had this whole, conversation in my head about what it meant.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of times as women, things that affect social arrangements, kind of like, being late to maybe meet someone or whatever, because women are usually the ones organizing it, I think we can take that as like we arranged this and now this looks bad and da-da-da. So what is something internally that we could tell ourselves? I think women are so much more concerned about what other people are going to think, but really it comes down to what you and your partner and your coupleship, what works for you. Like say your partner is really flaky and always ends up canceling plans or whatever, and then you're left with, oh, okay, now I've got to, what do you need? What conversations need to happen there with yourself, maybe with your partner, so that they understand how these things make you feel before you get to that point of, okay, well, this is a problem, and now I know how to work with it.
Mm-hmm. So great question. That's a great question. So how do you get to that point of acceptance? So one level is I had to shift the narrative inside my head about the meaning that I was attributing to the things that he was doing. So the meaning that I started with attributing to it was that I wasn't a priority. And so I had to look at, well, it's not just with me. He's like this in every area of his life. And so so really challenging. And in psychology, we call this limiting thinking patterns. So a limiting thinking pattern is any thought that doesn't serve me in getting to the goal that I want to get at. And so sometimes we'll have mental distortions, like thoughts that we tell ourselves that's not based in reality. It's based in other childhood things that we've gone through. So that was the first thing that I had to do, is really access what's the narrative, what's the story that I'm telling myself, what's the meaning that I'm attaching to it, and is that 100% true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
So I suppose moving slightly on, but based on what you just said, are there any resources you'd recommend for people, either, obviously relationships, the obvious one, but not strictly restricted to that, sorry. Are there any books on psychology or development or anything that you would recommend to people for helping their own growth and happy relationships?
So definitely,
other than your website, obviously we'll be linking that, but anything that you think would be helpful beyond that?
Okay, definitely my book Marital Peace is a great resource in helping couples to get strategies on how to effectively communicate and how to work through limiting thinking patterns. I think this is so important because this can create depression. Like if we are telling ourselves things inside of our head and having thoughts that's creating like sadness and loneliness and disconnection, it can lead to depression and anxiety.
So that's a really good point, actually, that I hadn't really thought about, but you've got me thinking that what is the point of a relationship if not to in some way make your life better? You don't tie yourself to someone because you're too happy and you want to make yourself less happy. Like you want them to make your life better in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're right, like what you just said about the potential for anxiety and depression, and if you feel like you can't communicate and you're holding things in and you're just carrying around that weight, yeah, I suppose it suddenly makes a lot of sense to me that of course there's going to be negative emotional repercussions to that.
When it goes along, we interviewed a couple, our first interview.
Sam and Jared?
Yeah, and they created like a long distance activity book for couples in long distance relationships to still bond and have time together even when they're apart. And something that Jared said that has stuck with me was, always assume good intent. And so I think when we have these internal conversations with ourselves about what our partner's action means, we're assuming that they have bad intent and they're doing things intentionally to make us feel this way, and they're not. They're just being thoughtless, or they don't realize, or whatever. So yeah, it is really dangerous. But I really wanted to ask you something else. It's kind of a slight change of direction, but
okay.
You mentioned depression, and also on your website I saw that you really experience in working with different clinical issues like schizophrenia, anxiety, major depression, bipolar. And, I've always been quite outspoken and I guess outspoken about my own struggles with anxiety, depression, and promoting, people dealing with that, and also how important it is to be open with that in a relationship. Do you deal with couples where one of the members of the relationship are struggling with one or more of these problems?
Yes, I do. And thank you so much for your openness in saying like, hey, sometimes I have struggled with anxiety and depression, because I think that allows for your listeners to see that, hey, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in what I struggle with. And so, yeah, that's definitely something that I myself have had to work through in the past, like periods where I felt depressed, like periods where I've gone through grief and loss. And I also help the couples that I serve through periods of depression and anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge thing for people who suffer with anxiety and depression. I think everyone experiences even a touch of it from time to time, but for people who, are like clinically diagnosed with these things, as I have been from a small child, it can really play a part on who we are as a person, and our behaviors can change so much when we're in a bad period of it, that it can really affect our relationship, our relationships with people. I'm really lucky in that Rich has also experienced not so much a depression, but periods of anxiety, and so he can really relate to me through it. But I just wondered if you could give just a few words of wisdom to couples where, someone is struggling, how can the partner help, and how can the person suffering communicate what they're going through so that their partner better understands it?
That is such a great question, because I definitely see that sometimes the person is not like you and Rich, where y'all understand what each other is going through. But for some couples, one person is depressed and the other person is like, why can't you just pull yourself out of it? Like,
Exactly.
shake it off. Like, get up. Like, put some like just kind of telling them that they need to shake it off versus actually being a support. And sometimes people think that they're being supportive when actually they're doing things to make the depression worse.
Exactly.
Some of the things that I recommend and we'll talk for both people. So for the person who is depressed, being clear about what do you need to feel better. So for example, saying to your partner, like, hey, could we maybe go out for a walk today? Or, sometimes I just struggle with scheduling my doctor's appointments. Would you be willing to set up my appointment for my therapist this week? Can you hold my hand? Just like really specifically, clearly things that you need to feel supported, asking for it. And then
it's amazing to hear you say, I just wanted to sorry to interrupt you, but you say, I struggle to make an appointment with my doctor. And I think what people who've never experienced anxiety or depression don't understand is the most basic tasks can seem absolutely terrifying and overwhelming. And to hear a psychologist acknowledge that, I think is really powerful for people who haven't experienced that, to understand a little bit more about what their partner is going through, because suddenly everything seems gigantic and huge. So sorry, I really related to that, because I've been in places like that before, and I know a lot of other people have as well. And I think people just don't recognize it, really, who haven't experienced that.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for bringing this up and creating space on the podcast today to talk about this, because I think that is something that a lot of people are struggling with and not really having the tools on either how to get support themselves or how to support their significant other through it.
Yeah, it's really, really important topic to me. Just as someone who has been through it, and just, kind of family that's been through it a lot too. You just appreciate anyone who wants to kind of listen and help. But sorry, I think you were just about to get on to the part about what the person who's not suffering can do for their partner.
So for the person that is not experiencing the anxiety and depression, sometimes it's just your presence. Sometimes it's just your physical presence. And for someone just to know that they're not alone, that is healing. And so sometimes we can think, oh, I need to do this big, huge thing. But sometimes it's just sitting next to them, holding their hand on the couch, cuddling with them. And what we know from science is that we know that there are things that the body releases, hormones that the body releases through physical touch. So there is something called oxytocin, and oxytocin is the love hormone. It's the bonding hormone. In the beginning, couples feel that feeling where they can't wait to see each other. It's just a look and it's on. They can't wait to talk on the phone. But we talked some about 3 years in, we see oxytocin levels dip. And that's when couples say, I just don't feel in love anymore. But physical affection can actually be healing for couples. And so sometimes it's just a matter of giving your partner a hug, and that can release oxytocin and serotonin in the body that physically makes people feel better. So physical touch can be very powerful.
Okay, yeah, that is so important.
So just get on to sort of you and your practice. You're not location dependent, are you? People can talk to you online and all that?
Yes, I do. I do sessions. It's very similar to Skype. It's called VC is the app. And so we can see each other. I can see them. They can see me. And we do the session that way online. So it's kind of similar to Skype.
Okay, perfect. I think we're sort of out of questions here. I don't think there's anything else you want to discuss. Otherwise, we'll just get your details and things for people to come and visit your website and get in touch with you.
Okay, well, absolutely. I will send you over the link to my website. It was such a pleasure coming on today. I just want to tell both of you I really appreciate all of the work that y'all are doing so that we can have conversations like this that is so needed. And so thank you for the space that you have created through this podcast. I think that y'all are doing some really amazing work. And so I'm
thank you
honored to be
so
a part
much.
of the show.
That's very kind. Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you so much for approaching us and giving us access to your expertise. It's
great
amazing.
talk. I really think this is going to be helpful to a lot of people.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that was our interview with Dr. Laura Lewis. We hope you guys got some great tips and pointers. We found that really interesting to talk through all those bits with her. Her website, if you'd like to find out more about her, is atlantacoupletherapy.com. We'll have further information and details about Dr. Laura Lewis in the episode notes here. So we hope that was a great episode for you, and we'll see you guys next week.